Okay, we are live, Richard.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Intelligent Millionaires Network webinar this evening. My name is Richard Putherer, and I'm delighted to be hosting the event this evening with my wonderful wife and business partner, Nina. Well, for those of you who are joining us for the first time this evening, you might ask, well, what is IMN? Well, IMN, or the Intelligent Millionaires Network, is an international business networking club where we have a number of clubs around the world. And the format is normally where each club gets together once a month, has an exceptional guest speaker coming to speak to our members and guests. And then we provide a forum for our members and guests to get to know each other, connect, grow together, do business together. And we have so many wonderful examples of just that, where new partnerships or new businesses have formed. And again, this evening, I can see by the people that are already logged in, we have a great representation of the world. Before I hand over to Nina to introduce our guest speaker this evening, I wanted to take a quick look back at last week's event. We had the wonderful, unstoppable Tracy as our keynote speaker last week. Tracy is a four-way amputee. She's climbed the Himalayas. She's a World Cup sailor and also a bronze medalist in the Paralympic Games for Canada. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady. Then we also have some exceptional speakers lined up, and I've really stepped up the pace over the last week and a half. Only at the end of last week, I was actually having a personal email exchange with Sir Ranulph Fiennes, regarded as the world's greatest living explorer. I thought, who else would be best positioned to come and talk to us about overcoming challenges when he's gone through the things that he has exploring the world. Tonight offers no exception, though, and I can't wait for Nina to bring up our guest speaker, Alan, this evening. Nina, over to you. Thanks all for listening, and have an exceptional evening. Nina.
Hello, everyone. Hi. It gives me the great pleasure to introduce Alan this evening. We first met Alan in 2016, 4 years ago, in Florida at JT Fox's house. So thank you very much, JT, for the wonderful introduction. We were in a group of impressive entrepreneurs, but when I got speaking to Alan, he stood out as being by far seriously impressive. He was telling me all about his Gold Rat research labs and how they've spent years with his teams researching decision-making techniques. And he was just such a super impressive yet humble guy. Several times after that, we've met in several continents around the world. And each time I get together with Alan, he blows me away with his latest update on what he's been up to since the last time I saw him. Whether it be that he's just been invited back again to Necker Island to meet with Sir Richard Branson, or whether it's the clients that he's just won, like Intel, Cisco, Tata Technologies and Microsoft have all invested and partnered with him for his decision-making software. Or that he's just finishing off his latest book that he's doing. Or the coolest thing of all was when he showed me a video testimonial from the CTO of Microsoft. So yes, Alan is Dr. Alan Barnard, one of the world's leading decision scientists, but he's also a seriously impressive all-round entrepreneur and wonderful guy. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our friend, Dr. Alan Barnard. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nina, and thank you to Richard for the kind introduction and the invitation. I'm super excited to be here. I've always wanted to speak at this event, so it's a great honor to be here. I'll start off with just a quick introduction about myself. As Nina mentioned, I'm a decision scientist, and I've always been really fascinated about what makes some people succeed despite all the odds against them, and others fail despite having really good starting conditions. And it turns out that the real differentiator is not the starting conditions that you have, but the starting assumptions and how those translate into decisions. So I'm going to try to answer 3 questions tonight that I'm sure, like you, we've all been curious about. Firstly, is when we look around us, whether we look at nature or business or in our private lives, why is failure much, much more common than success? Why is that? Secondly, are there avoidable decision mistakes that we make when it comes to decision making that makes failure almost unavoidable? And then lastly, is there a simple process that you can follow to reduce or even prevent some of these key decision mistakes? So that's what I'll share with you tonight. I'm an entrepreneur, as Nina mentioned, and like most entrepreneurs, what I did essentially is I turned this curiosity and passion of mine about decision making firstly into a life goal. My life goal is very simple. I want to help more and more people make better, faster decisions when it really matters. And the really matters part really matters because there's thousands of decisions that we make every day. The good news is, because it can be quite overwhelming, the good news is that most of these don't really matter. It might feel like they matter at the moment, you know, what we eat, what we do, who we with, what we say, but most of them don't matter. But there's a few that do matter a lot. Getting those right or wrong can be the difference between success or failure. So what I did was I said, okay, that's my life goal. How do I turn that into a business? I first joined corporate. I was in executive positions quite early on in my life. And then I met a person that changed my life that ended up becoming a mentor of mine, Dr. Eli Goldratt. He's the co-founder of my research labs, Golden Research Labs. And our research lab basically focuses on just 2 things. Trying to understand what are the avoidable decision mistakes people make both in their personal life, but also in managing businesses, and wider organizations, not just small businesses, but also big corporates like the clients that Nina mentioned, but also NGOs and organizations, government agencies. And the second objective is then to develop simple decision support methods and apps to help people to reduce or even prevent those common decision mistakes. So before I start, I want to start off with a poll. So Nina, if you can launch that first question for us in a poll. I'd like to find out from the people that are attending, I'd like to find out where you are at the moment, at this point in your life. When reflecting on what you've achieved so far, how do you feel about it? The first option is you're very proud. You've achieved much, much more than what you thought you'd ever would. Option number 2 is you're mostly satisfied. You achieved what you kind of expected to have achieved at this stage of your life. Option 3 is a little bit frustrated. Maybe you've achieved some of the goals that you've set in some aspects of your life. Maybe you've succeeded in business, but your relationships has been a mess, or vice versa, or you're really proud of your health side, but the business side isn't working out as expected. So a little bit frustrated. Or the last option, really disappointed. Many of these aspects for which you've set goals in your life, you've been quite disappointed. Of course, we give that last one a name. Some of you might recognize it. It's called the midlife crisis. When those expectation gaps become so big and we realize, oh my goodness, I'm running out of time. You know, when you're young and there's gaps, you have time on your hand. You can always catch up, right? But when you're starting to get to your 40s and 50s and you start literally hearing the clock ticking, then you get a little bit worried. So it's fascinating to see that there are some people that are really proud of what they've achieved. And I think probably all should be. There are some that are mostly satisfied. Maybe there's one or more aspects of their life that they're not that satisfied. A few, in fact, the majority a little bit frustrated, and some very disappointed. Well, I'm sort of sitting between the option number 3 and 5. I'm mostly frustrated and sometimes even very disappointed. I set very high goals for myself, like I'm sure everybody on this call does. And every now and again, you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, oh my goodness, I have limited time left. What am I going to do? So that's good to just get a snapshot. So I said that the first question I wanted to cover was, why is failure much, much more common than success? And this is something that I talk about both when I'm dealing with corporates as well as dealing with startups, and also when I do lectures at schools. I think it is really important that people understand that it will always be much easier to fail than to succeed. That there are many, 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 many ways to fail and very, very few ways to succeed. One of the examples I use when I lecture at schools is to say, imagine you have a simple recipe to follow. Just 4 steps, 4 ingredients, 1 temperature setting. How many ways are there to get it wrong? To mess up this cake that you're baking? Can you imagine that there's many ways? You can skip one of the steps, you can add a step that's unnecessary, you can miss one of the ingredients, not have enough of one of the ingredients, or have too much, or get the temperature setting wrong. How many ways are there to get it right? Very few, right? So that, I think, is an important lesson, is that when you reflect on your life and maybe you haven't achieved all the things that you set out to do, just always remember that the odds are against you. There's massive, in maths, we call it asymmetry, right? There's massive asymmetry against you. There will be very, very few people that succeed, and by far the majority will fail. And there's, in fact, a very interesting test that you can do, and that relates to the second poll. So, Nina, if you can bring up the second question for us. So I want you to think about a hypothetical case. Imagine you're a trader, and every time you make a trade, you can either make 25% or lose 25%. And the outcome is completely random, but the odds are 50-50. So 50% of the time you'll make 25%, 50% of the time you'll lose 25%. If you don't trade, maybe it's just trading in terms of you are trading your time in order to get some value. Sometimes you get 25% and sometimes you lose 25%. So imagine you have a starting number, a starting wealth of 100 units. The question is, over time, if you keep on doing this, having these trades or transactions, over time, what will happen? Will you end up with about the same as you started? Will you end up with less than you started, or will you end up with more than you started? The same is true for business. So imagine you have one good month where you make 25% more than the previous month, and then the month after that you lose 25% of sales, and then you make 25% again, and then you lose 25%. Imagine that. So what I'd like everybody to do, hopefully you've got your smartphones close by, or a tablet, or some form of calculator that you can access. What I'd like you to do is to open up your calculator and do a very simple test. You're going to start with 100, and all that you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, I'm going to start with 100, and literally this is what you're going to be typing into your calculator. 100 plus 25% equals, and then minus 25% equals, and then plus 25% equals, and then minus 25% equals, and then plus 25% equals, minus 25% equals. Do you notice what's happening? Our intuition screamed at us that as long as I can make or lose the same percentage, over time it should really balance out. If I have the same amount of good years where I made 25% more than the previous year, than what I have bad years where I lost 25% compared to the previous year, or when I'm trading and I first make 25% on my trade, or I make a profit of 25% on maybe a house that I built and flipped, And then the next one, I lose 25%. As long as the 25%, the gains and losses are equal, it should balance out, right? No, it doesn't. It's asymmetrical. And this is the very interesting thing about reality. In fact, if you keep playing this game, and it's very easy to do it in a little Excel sheet, what you'll notice is just after 20 transactions, you would have lost 50% of your wealth already. After 50 transactions, you would have lost 80% of your wealth. After 80 transactions, you would have lost 95% of your wealth. And after 150 transactions, basically game over. You're left with nothing. Now, I'm not going to talk about this tonight. This is a topic for another discussion, but definitely will answer some questions at the end of my presentation. For example, I can give you a very simple formula that you could use to determine if a potential deal has got a gain and a loss risk. And there's a risk of losing 25%. How much must you gain in the transaction to at least break even? It's actually a very simple calculation, but more about that later if we have time for some questions. So the answer to the question, the first one, is why is failure much more common than success? Not just in business and life in general, but in nature, is simply because there are so many ways to fail and so few ways to succeed. So always remember, it's not just about, learning from every failure, but to understand that the odds are stacked against you. So if you failed a number of times, you've just been unlucky. You must just keep on trying, but there's a condition on that. And here's the condition. A very important lesson that I've learned in life is that when it comes to failure is not just much more common than success. But the cure to failure is not money, in the same way that the cure to poverty is not money. The cure to both failure and to poverty is better decision making. So I'll let that sink in a little bit. Imagine a person that keeps on failing and you give them more money. What will happen? The money will buy them time. But if they don't change the quality and speed of their decisions, they'll end up losing that money. And that's what happens most cases to people that win on the lottery. They've just been lucky, but they haven't invested at all in the quality and speed of their decision making. They'll end up losing most, if not all of that money, and end up poor again. So when I say you have to improve your decision making, practically, how do you do that? Right? Two very simple things. Number one, stop making really bad decisions. And you'll see that when I go over the math of this example that we've just done, is that the bigger the potential loss that you can have on a decision, the much bigger the equivalent gain has to be in order to at least break even. So the key thing about everything, all the transactions that you do, whether you are trading, whether you are trading your time for money, whether you're buying and flipping houses, is the number one thing is make sure you don't have really bad decisions. Decisions that can essentially make you lose everything. And the example that I use for that is think about playing the lottery versus playing Russian roulette. Right? Now, most of you hopefully understand both games. If I said to you which one would be the best one for you to play, hopefully most people would say it would be lottery. Why? Because if I lose with a lottery, there's a very small downside if I lose. I lose a few dollars. If I win, there's a massive upside. What is the probability of winning in the lottery? 1 in a million. But what's the impact of winning? Is enormous. What's the probability of losing in the lottery, right? Is almost 1 million out of 1 million. But what's the impact of losing is I'm only losing a few dollars. And One of the reasons why we end up making bad decisions is because we confuse the probability of success or failure versus the impact of success or failure. We often end up playing Russian roulette with our wealth because we think that the odds is for us. What is the probability of succeeding in Russian roulette? Right? 5 out of 6. That's pretty good. Should you do it? No, because the impact of success is basically nothing. You stay alive. You were alive before you played the game. So why the hell did you do it in the first place? Very small upside, but a big downside. If you fail, it will end up costing your life. So that's the first thing, is stay away from the really bad decisions. And what is a really bad decision? It is one that has a small upside if it works and a huge downside if it doesn't. I'll give you 2 examples of that in a minute. The second thing that you have to do is to start making really good decisions. And as you might have guessed, what is a really good decision? It's a decision or an option that you have that you're exercising, a change that you can make in your business or your life that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. So hopefully that criteria is very simple. Really bad decision, small upside if it works, big downside if it doesn't. Like playing the Russian roulette. What is a really good decision? Big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't. And as long as you make enough of those really good decisions, success is almost unavoidable. You have to tolerate the small failures in between, because even a bunch of small downsides could still accumulate. So you have to make sure you've got enough buffer to be able to tolerate those small losses. But as long as you have a few of those options that have a big upside if it works, you'll always end up being successful. So let me share with you 2 simple examples, one from big corporate and one from a small business. So the first one was early last year, I got a call from somebody. I had their number on my phone, but I'd never spoken to them in person. We share a mutual friend. Robert, the CEO of one of the Fortune 500 companies. And I received the call. I was quite surprised and greeted very politely. He said, "Hi, Robert, it's great to get a call from you. How can I help?" He said, "Well, my chairman said I should give you a call." I said, "Okay, what can I help with?" He said, "Well, he disagrees with what I'm planning to do. And he said, I should speak to you because every time he speaks to me, I give him some additional options or some other considerations." So I said, "So what's up?" He said, "Well, they've just a few weeks ago announced their results, and they were 10% below market expectations." I said, "Okay." And I can imagine that there's now massive pressure on you to make some kind of change, to take some kind of action. He said, "Absolutely, I have to do something." I said, "So what's the option that you're considering?" He said, "Well, I'm planning to announce 10% layoffs." And he just kept quiet. So I said, "Okay, so I can understand probably your rationale is something like this, is that when you asked your teams to prepare to achieve 100 and you ended up only achieving 90, you must have assumed that they must have, made sure that they had enough resources to achieve the 100. They only achieved 90, so they probably have 10% resources too much. And that by asking them to give back 10% of the resource, which will translate in layoffs, you should get the saving without any negative." He said, "Exactly. So you agree with me that this is a good option?" I said, "No, I just said that I understand how you could reach that conclusion." So he said, "So do you think it's a bad option?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to say if it's good or bad. What I can give you is my criteria for deciding if it's good or bad." So I said, "Can you tell me what is the maximum upside if this option that you're planning to exercise really works?" And he said, "Well, I'll save 10% of the cost." I said, "Okay, but I want to know what the impact on the bottom line is." So The people that will be impacted by the layoffs, how much are they as a percentage of your total sales, that cost part? He said about 20%. So I said, okay, so if you reduce that part by 10%, the net impact on your net profit is only going to be 2%. That's the maximum upside, that you can increase your profit by just 2%. He said, yes, but I mean, it's still quite a bit. I said, yes, but now my question is, what's the maximum downside? And he stayed quiet for a while. I said, think about the worst case scenario. What will happen? And then he started rattling it off, right? There's a big risk that if we announce these layoffs, we will probably end up losing our best people because they will go first, right? They have options, the others don't. We might end up losing massive amount of market share. The unions might strike, all these things. So I said, okay, so tell me this option that you're planning to exercise, does it have a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't? Or does it have a big downside if it doesn't work and a small upside if it does? And he said, I get your point. So that's a simple example out of corporate where just the simple criteria can help to prevent you make really bad decisions. The second one that might resonate with quite a few people is one that was made by Katie. I met Katie also through this network. And when I spoke to her, I said, how are things going? And initially she was putting up a brave face and said, oh, it's going really well. You know, I quit my 95 jobs and, you know, I'm now working for myself. I'm a coach and things can't be any better. Well, after a few days of getting to know Katie, one night after she had a few glasses of wine, I said to her, so tell me, how's it really going? And she like broke down and said, it's been a disaster. I said, okay, so tell me more about this because we've all been there. She said, well, you know, she used to have a really good job and she assumed that the upside of quitting her job would be that she would be able to make much more money, work for herself so that she would have less stress. I said, so what's the reality? She said, she's earning less now and she has much, much more stress. And then on top of that, she said she had just invested about 20,000 of her savings to develop an online coaching program. And she sold 7 registrations at an average price of $123. Now, again, when you look at that decision to say her expectation was that there's going to be a big upside and a small downside, could it have been predicted? And I think it could be, because the majority of people that end up quitting their jobs and starting up their own consulting businesses or coaching businesses earn the same or significantly less than what they could have earned if they had stayed on in their job. Remember, failure much more common than success. So that's the kind of the bad news, right? And the good news is hopefully that you have a simple criteria that hopefully you can apply. So I mentioned, what is a really good decision? Well, a really good decision, as I mentioned, is one that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. And as long as you make enough of those decisions and you have a bit of a buffer to carry you through, because a few of them you will lose, but you won't lose a lot. As long as you have enough cash to cover you through those, then you're going to end up being very successful. But you must be willing to tolerate that, and you must make sure that all the options you exercise, all the changes you make in your personal life or your business life satisfies that criteria. Big upsides if it works, small downside if it doesn't. Stay away from those ones that's the opposite. So related to these, what could have happened? Well, the first one is the CEO ended up deciding that the layoffs would have been a really bad option. And what he ended up doing was to double down on a strategy that they had embarked on a little bit earlier, him and his whole team, based on advice that we had provided, which was focus on the markets that are not price sensitive. They're in a high-tech business making products that had become quite commoditized, and they were finding it more and more difficult to compete against cheap imports that functionally, to be really honest, is not that much different to theirs. Of course, their brand name and guarantees, etc., are much better. But what they decided on was to focus on the market that's not price sensitive, but rather time or service sensitive. And really focus on those and guarantee the lead time it will take them to supply the full order, or guarantee the availability of that service or products to the market, but in return for a small premium. And in their case, imagine $1 billion business. This is one of the business units that we started with. And they had, when we started, about $50 million worth of net profit. So if we could increase the average selling price by reducing discounts, because they are trying to compete against these cheap imports on the one side, and on the other side by charging a small premium, if the net impact of that was a 10% increase in the average selling price, which is not that much, over a 2-year period, that 10% increase is worth $100 million. And that $100 million would have dropped straight to the bottom line, increasing their profit from $50 to $150 million. That's a 200% increase in net profit with a small change of 10% in the average selling price. That's an option that has a big upside if it works, and a small downside if it doesn't. Why is there a small downside? Because you're offering it as an option to customers that says, if service or lead time is really important to you, we're willing to guarantee it, but for a small premium. There's the cost of having our items, and then there's the cost of not having our items. What could Katie have done differently? Well, the first advice would be, don't quit your 9-to-5 jobs and start doing online coaching before you've tested whether your skills, your knowledge that you're providing, is the perception of value high enough for that, in order to not just compensate for your normal salary, but to give you a much, much bigger upside. And the good news is she ended up going back to her job. Thank goodness, she was really good at what she did. So they gladly accepted her back, and she negotiated with her business owner to actually run a coaching business in her spare time. And the way that she sold it was to say, you know what, the best way to polish your skills, the best way to become really good at something, is to teach and coach others. So there's an upside for a business. She became much more productive and constantly grew her skills. So that's a very simple example of how the same decision that you've made, that you expected was a good decision, turned out to be a really bad decision. But it's never too late. You can always turn back, as long as you apply the right criteria. So here's my classification for you for decision outcomes. Is the best possible decision is one that has I call it high-low, high upside, low downside if it fails. The worst one is low-high, low upside if it works, high downside if it fails. Somewhere in the middle is a good decision, which is low upside, low downside, or one that's maybe good but risky, which is high upside, high downside. Depending on how much cash buffer you've got, you can maybe risk that, as long as there's asymmetry, that the high upside is much higher than the high downside. So that's just in terms of decision making. I mentioned that we've studied in our laboratory why good people make bad decisions. And it turns out that when it comes to managing businesses, and probably even in our life, there are 5 avoidable mistakes that we all make. The first one is we waste our scarcest resources on things that are unimportant, things that won't help a lot, or maybe one of those low-high decisions, or things that we can't do anything about. So we waste our scarcest resources on that, and we also stress about it. So what is our scarcest resource? The number one at the top of the list, our scarcest resource is not time or money or relationship capital or motivation. It's our limited attention. The number of things that demand your attention or could benefit from your attention will always exceed your available attention. What's the difference between attention and time? Attention is basically that portion of time that you have every day where you can focus on making meaningful progress to the goals that are important to you. So that's by far your scarcest resource. So number one mistake, don't waste your limited attention doing things that are unimportant, or at the same time, the opposite side of the coin is to procrastinate on doing things that could have made a big difference. And then you fall into this vicious cycle of having to explain to yourself and others, why haven't you done those things, and coming up with recovery plans. So that's mistake number one, wasting your scarcest resource on things that are not important, or on the other side, procrastinating things on things that actually could have made a big difference. That's number one. Number two mistake is when we have identified an important problem or opportunity to focus on, we often jump to a solution, or we simply jump to blaming somebody. None of those two are particularly useful. And I'll explain just now what you should rather do and the consequences of making this mistake. So often we are under pressure, we see a problem, we see an opportunity, we jump to a solution. It's like, I'm a little bit overweight, I jump to go on a crash diet, right? Really bad idea. Or I jump to blaming myself for my lack of discipline and making good nutritional choices, or I blame my parents or the doctor or fake news or whatever it is, right? None of those two are really useful when it comes to dealing with problems or opportunities. And I'll explain briefly just now. So that's number two. Number three is assuming that when you have a problem, that the only way to resolve that problem is that you have to give up something, that you have to compromise. When you face a decision conflict, that the only way to resolve that decision conflict is to compromise, or to think that there's only one way out. And I'll share with you just now why is that bad and what's the solution to that. So that's a third mistake, is assuming there's only one way to solve problems or resolve conflicts. And often that means having to give up something to gain something, so to compromise. We know from psychology that we assign much higher weightings to losses than equivalent gains. We hate giving up stuff, right? So that's what triggers our status quo bias. We don't want to lose anything. Okay, so that's number three. Number four, using your own intuition or other people's intuition, that as soon as you come up with the breakthrough, what's the first thing that crosses your mind? What's the first thing that happens when you share your breakthrough with somebody else? They don't go, oh, that's amazing. They go, yes, but. Yes, I like it, but. There's always a but. Now, the two mistakes that we can make is to either use these yes, buts as excuses not to act. Right? So we think we've got a brilliant idea, that we share it with our first person, our partner, business partner, romantic partner, and they go, yes, but, and then we go, oh, you're right. I probably shouldn't try it, right? So we use it as excuses. The second mistake related to that we can make, but the other side of the coin, is that we ignore valid yes, buts. People try to warn us, and we push through regardless. We could have used those yes, buts to improve the solution, and gotten them to feel part of it and feel partly ownership to that. So that's the fourth mistake that we make that's avoidable, is we use yes buts as excuses not to act, or we simply ignore them. And then the final mistake, and this is my kind of personal favorite, is we don't realize that every solution we are going to try, every decision we make is kind of like an experiment. And we suck at doing good experiments, right? We decide I'm going to go on a diet, and then a month later we are frustrated this diet isn't working. Like, are you following the diet? Exactly. You know, I bought that exercise machine. You know, I imagined how I'm going to look after a month, and I'm not looking like that. Like, okay, are you using the exercise machine 15 minutes a day? No, 15 minutes a week. Okay, that explains it, right? We don't do good experiments. We have to learn how to do good experiments. You know, what is it that we want to check with this experiment? We've changed something in the design of our product or service. We expect 5% increase in sales or 50% increase in sales. Okay, what must happen for that to take place? How can we check those assumptions and get fast feedback? So those are the 5 mistakes. And if I can ask Nina to bring up the third poll, which is again just a bit of a check that I'm not alone in this, is of these 5 mistakes, how many of those mistakes do you think you've made? And here's the options. I haven't made any of those mistakes. I've made 1 or 2, 3 or 4, or all of them. Really, really interesting. Now, clearly, many of you are very successful. So it's good to see that nobody's selecting none, because that would be probably requiring some assistance from a psychologist. Some sessions might have been useful there. And it's good to see that there are people that are very honest. I've certainly have made all of them, not once, but hopefully I'm getting better at learning from each of them and then turning that lesson into what's the mechanism or the process that we can use to try and avoid these mistakes in the future. Thank you very much for participating. That was really, really useful. So, what is the process that we could follow to reduce or even prevent these 5 common mistakes? And this was a real big aha moment for me. This is a field that I ended up doing my PhD on. And the big aha moment was realizing, wow, there's these 5 mistakes that we can make that most of us recognize once you know them, right? It's not something new that I'm presenting to you, hopefully, as we've all recognized. It's just nice to see them together, firstly, and secondly, to realize that there's a sequence to them, right? What's the first mistake we have to prevent? Is make sure we don't waste our scarcest resources dealing with things that are unimportant or procrastinating on things that's important. So guess what should be step 1 of a process is that what's this problem or opportunity I face and why is it important to resolve for me and for others that I care about? And I need to know how to answer that question very simply and very clearly, and then allow me to check my answers to see, could I be making one of those mistakes? I'm dealing with something that in the bigger scheme of things is not that important, or actually I can't do much about, so why the hell stress about it? Or I realize that I've been procrastinating on something, so why don't I just sit down for an hour or 2 and invest the time to actually see if I can make a better decision? Find an option that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. And make sure I stay away from those options that have a small upside if it works and a big downside if it doesn't. So that's step 1, a very simple question. What's the problem or opportunity you're facing? And explain why it's important to you and to others to resolve it now. If it satisfies the criteria that this is important enough to invest some time, then you're ready for step 2. And remember the mistake, the second mistake we're trying to prevent is jumping to a solution, not realizing that we always have 2 options. I can make a change or I don't make a change. So the first thing is to realize that there's not just one option, but there's always 2. And I have to consider the unique pros and cons of each of these options and find a way of deciding which option or modification of that option is the best option moving forward, right? But the first part is to understand that. And in fact, a very interesting research insight that we gained is we asked people of all the blockages or obstacles that you face in achieving the goals that are important to you, which do you think you don't have enough of to make meaningful progress towards those goals? Is it lack of wisdom or lack of courage? And to our surprise, most people said it was lack of courage. And what we realize is that we often confuse lack of courage for the inability to resolve ambivalence. Ambivalence is that awful emotion that we experience when we see both the positive of doing something or being with someone, and we see the negative of doing that or being with that person. and then we get stuck. We procrastinate until the consequences become so big, and then we overreact, and we keep on repeating that vicious cycle. So what we tested in our research lab is, what if we gave people a very simple technique to resolve that ambivalence with a win-win option, an option that leaves them off much better than what they were before? Will that give them the courage that they thought that they lacked? And the great news is it does. So that's all what step 2 is about. Step 3, as I mentioned, is to think that there's only one way out of situations. Often that way involves some kind of compromise, that I have to give up something in order to gain something. That's basically a zero-sum game kind of mindset. There is a non-zero-sum game option mindset that says, actually, there must be a better way. There must be a way of coming up with options that have a big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't. So that's what step 3 is about, is how do I discover these new options? Number 4 I mentioned is that we use yes buts as excuses not to act, or we simply ignore them. So once we've come up with this breakthrough, this option that is a big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't, I have to anticipate that every single solution I come up with, doesn't matter how big of a breakthrough, it will have a potential downside risk. There will be reasons why it could fail. It might not be sufficient to be a win for everybody. There might be some potential negatives. There might be some implementation obstacles. And in that step 4, what we want to do is we want to convert those yes buts into yes ands, to keep on adding things to our breakthrough. What can we do to prevent these? And then the last one is just design a good experiment and, go and try it. Because at some point you become, okay, I've done enough analysis, now just do it, right? Is that we have to keep checking our assumptions before we act, unless we realize acting is the only way of checking. There comes a point where we can sit in a room and argue about whether this product will really sell or not. Best thing is just to go and pull the trigger and actually take action. And this simple 5-step process that I've just mentioned is essentially what was the outcome of my PhD research. Is I called it the 5-step pro-con cloud method. And for those that might be interested, I can share some information about why that is. But essentially the name comes from the 2 giants in the field of decision-making on whose shoulders I could stand. Benjamin Franklin, that created the pro-con list. He did that in 1770, 250 years later almost, and people are still using that technique, so it's pretty powerful. It has major benefits, but it also has some major limitations. And then the second technique that I got from my mentor, Dr. Eli Goldratt, he created a technique called the Evaporating cloud method. Again, that method had some major benefits, but it also had some limitations. And this 5-step process that I developed maintains the benefits of these methods, but at the same time overcomes their limitations. And then the last step in the process was we tested this process over the last decade. We started off in private sector, tested with big corporates first, Fortune 500 clients, then with small and medium-sized enterprises, and then with startups, to see if they followed this process in a systematic way, going from step 1 to 5, will it systematically allow them to come up with breakthroughs, invent amazing solutions to problems that are experiencing in their business or maybe in their industry. And then the last 2 tests was to do it within the public sector, with government agencies, with NGOs, and then finally with individuals. And the outcomes was really remarkable. In that process, we could simplify the process down from something that used to take 5 days all the way down to something that can be completed in just an hour or so. In fact, last year in Edinburgh, I was invited to the TED Summit there. And the TED Summit is quite an exclusive event. There's about 250 of the top TED speakers that attend this specific event. And the workshop I was asked to facilitate was just 90 minutes long. And it was titled, How to Make Impossible Decisions. How do you go about solving wicked problems that have been around for a long time in your organization, in your company, in your industry, in your personal life? And the breakthroughs that people got in just 90 minutes was quite amazing. Now, one of the enabling conditions was for that is that I developed an app with my team called the Harmony Decision Maker app. And the app just makes it much faster to go through it. You don't have to remember the process. It will ask you all the right questions. And at the end of it, you basically have everything on your app. So it keeps a full record of your analysis that you can then share privately with your coach, with your managers, with colleagues, or even publicly. You can share it into our community library. And that's basically where we are today, is we've created this app and the process. Both of them, we've been very, very honored that both of them have received multiple awards. And that's what I'd like to leave you with tonight, is to encourage you to go to your app store. The app is for free. Just search for Harmony Decision Maker. And the app will actually take you through each of the 5 steps. It contains a lot of tutorials and video to show you exactly how to use it, and to encourage you to try it out on an important decision that you are facing.
Alan, thank you so much. I've run out of space in my book for the notes I've taken. It's exceptional. As Nina mentioned at the beginning of the call, we've known each other for some years now, but it never ceases to impress upon me the knowledge you impart. So thank you so much. I loved every minute of that.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. One of the key things, I loved the example, Alan, that the plus 25%, minus 25%. Just getting someone to do that with a calculator in front of them, I thought it was a very, very simplistic way of demonstrating how your mind can actually trick you with doing some basic. Are you okay to do a demonstration of your app?
Yes,
We've got messages coming through.
So I'll quickly show you, if you don't mind. It'll just take a minute or so. So this is, I mentioned that our app is called Harmony Decision Maker. You can download it from any of the app stores, whether it's iOS or Google, the Play Store, even Amazon. Just type in Harmony Decision Maker and you'll find it there. If you open up the app, if you go to help section, basically what you'll find there is these 5 steps that I've mentioned. And you can see at the bottom here, each of these steps have been designed to prevent a common mistake. So step 1, just a reminder, define your problem and why it's important. It's going to ask you 5 free questions that you will simply type in the answers, either in this graphical interface or in a messenger UI. And if you were interested to know why are we doing this step to prevent a common mistake of wasting our limited attention by dealing with unimportant problems or procrastinating on important problems. So as you scroll through it, you'll see that what's the step 2 is the mistake that we make here is we jump to a solution. So don't jump to a solution, some kind of change. Understand that there's a conflict. Change, don't change. What's the unique upside and downside of each of those? Then step 3 is, what is the 4 options that the app will guide you through? For example, option 1 is that the change that you're considering, that could be to quit a bad habit or to get a new IT system or maybe to add additional products or to quit your job or your relationship. That's not a viable option as long as you have to give up the positive related to the current status quo, or you have to live with the negative related to the change. So what the app will do is it will ask you, what can you add so you don't have to give up that stress coping mechanism? That's the first plus. I call this option change plus plus. And the second plus to make it viable is, what can you add to reduce the effort or the risk? And we use a little storyline that you'll see the characters here. We say that a change is like climbing a mountain. What's the unique upside of climbing the mountain is that there's a pot of gold at the top that you can't get if you don't make the effort to climb the mountain. But there's a unique downside, which is represented by these crutches. That represents all the effort or risk of climbing up. That's a unique pros and cons of the change. But there's also a pro and con of not changing, which is staying, not climbing, right? Is that firstly, there's a con of not doing it, which is this alligator that's swimming around in the lake at the base of the mountain that's going to eat you if you didn't do anything. So even if there wasn't a pot of gold, if that alligator is big enough, you'll run up the mountain. But why don't we run up the mountain? It's not just the crutches, the effort and risk of climbing, but there's this character which is a mermaid. She represents the comfort zone, the things that we don't want to give up. And, she's become a friend of ours. We don't want to leave her behind, and we can't take her with us. So each of these 4 options, what the app does is it guides you through a few simple questions to make various options viable. Change plus plus, then it switches over no change plus plus. So under what conditions would keeping my old legacy system be a viable option? It's not viable if I have to give up the pot of gold or live with an alligator. So again, it will ask you, what can you add rather than give up? Option 3 is when and when not to change. And then option 4 is another change. Now that you understand what you really want and what you don't want, can you think of another change? Maybe to outsource all of IT. So that's what step 3 does. And it does it with just a few simple questions. And then step 4 is about using the yes buts to further enhance your solution, not to use them excuses, not to act, and at the same time, not to ignore them. So it says the app will ask you, once you've got these 4 options, which one are you going to select? Which one has the biggest upside if it works, smallest downside if it doesn't? Now, do you have any yes buts? Yes, but I like it, but it's not sufficient to be a one. Or yes, I like it, but it has some negatives. Yes, I like it, but it has some obstacles. To say what's a yes ands. And that helps you to make a much more robust solution. And then step 5 is basically designing that experiment. Right? And here the beauty is the app will automatically do this for you. Whatever answers you've given in step 1, it'll put it into the box that says, why is this change needed? Whatever answers you've put into the pros and cons boxes, it will say that's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to get more of these pros and less of these cons. And then all your solution elements, the change plus, 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 it'll put into the how-to. And that's basically your experiment design that you can then share with people, and that guides you through to the top. And then the last step in the process is basically to use the app to monitor the progress. So you can actually use the app to share your progress, your analysis progress and implementation with friends, colleagues, etc. So for those that are wanting to use the app, just bear in mind in the help section, you'll find this help. There's also the storyline that will share with you this idea of the pot of gold and how that works. And there's even a little video that you can play, and that will tell you a fable story of exactly how to use the app. So let me just bring that back. Oh, trying to orientate my phone. So just going into the library, when you open up the app, you'll basically get 3 libraries. So the first one is my decisions. These are decisions that I'm working on privately. That's in my library, either my own or people that I'm coaching or helping. You can recognize some of these decisions are quite serious, right? Do I come out and tell my family that I'm gay? A parenting conflict, a smoking conflict, a project pipelining conflict, Chris's life goal conflict. So these are all the decisions that I have in my library. And you can immediately see which step of the analysis I am at, or in the cases where I've already completed the analysis, I can see, for example, not achieving the sales increase that we targeted. I can see where we are in the implementation. So in this case, NS is not started, IP is in progress, F is frozen. It means that we're still planning to do it, but we're just freezing it for now. Completed, or C, means I've taken all the actions, but I haven't yet achieved the outcome, and A means I've actually achieved the outcome. So I can very quickly see where in the analysis process I am, and if I had a coach, I can share them, and that's basically what's in the shared library. Is these are all the decisions that have been shared with me, either privately, either with people's name or without their name, anonymously. And if I open up this, I can basically go into any of them. And I'll show you an example of that. And then the last part is this community library where people can share their decisions. So it's almost like Facebook, but rather than publishing your best life and sharing your best life about what you're eating and where you are and who you're with, this is an opportunity for people to share their real life. You know, our real lives are messy. We all know that. You know, we overreact, we underreact, we procrastinate. And this is a way where we can share it, our analysis, with others so that we can learn from each other. So here I can see these are, just have a look at the range of the decisions that our users, and we've got about 10,000 users already around the world. You can see the range of decisions that people are sharing, right? And if I'm interested in any one of these, I can see this is in progress. I can open up what we call your story on one page. So this basically shows you graphically, this is the problem that this person was experiencing. She's, by the way, I know this person, she's the executive director of a hospital, and she said every year, so this is her dark cloud, her problem. Every year, by being prudent throughout the year, I face a conflict on whether to spend any remaining budget before year end or risk losing it. I click on next and I can see the rest of her answers. Why is this important for her? And why is it important for others? And then I can also see what is the conflict that she faced. Pressure to not spend the remaining budget or pressure to spend it. And each of those have got unique upsides and downsides. And you can also see the conflict of the one that she's blaming. I mentioned one of the mistakes that we're trying to prevent here is just blaming somebody rather than understanding what's the conflict that they faced. So as I go through this, the next step is I can see all the 4 options that she explored. And then I can see which option she selected. And the yes buts that was raised and the yes ands that they came up with. And then the final step is the experiment design. So that's one way of actually experiencing it. But there's another way. If you click on the play button here, I don't know if you'll hear the sound here, but this will basically read off. It's not coming through because we've got it connected to the computer. But if I click play, it will actually read off this full analysis. And here you'll see it's the interview between our Harmony virtual advisor that's asking all the right questions and the answer that was given by this person. So you can actually see the whole conversation of how they did the analysis, or at any point in time, switch back to the graphical view to see what the outcome of that analysis was. So that's just 2 ways of consuming these stories. And you can see from these, there's, I'm constantly surprised. I'm 11 years old and under pressure to study harder, right? Okay, I'm curious about that. What the hell is this about, right? To say, okay, so what's the problem that this kid's faced? I'm currently writing exams, have to study, but I don't like it. Sounds familiar, right? Why is this bad for me? It's my points on my report card, and if I do bad, I will feel embarrassed and maybe fail my class. And why is it important for the others that I care about? My parents and teachers will be disappointed about my bad grades, and I will set a bad example. So just by looking at this, this is this person's whole story. I can get their story. This is why we call this your story on one page. So what's the conflict that they face? Study really hard versus don't. And who did I blame? Turns out they blamed their teacher. What action did they blame their teachers? My teacher made the exam so difficult that you won't do well unless you study. And say, okay, what did you want your teacher to do? Right? What's the change that you wanted them to make? My teacher make it possible to pass the exams just by paying attention in class and doing well, right? And now this person has put themselves in the shoe of the one that they blame. So we are piloting this app in a number of schools, and that's one of the invitations. If there's anybody in a network that's somehow associated with schools, we'd love to partner with you. Kids that are being bullied, what's the problem? I'm being bullied at school. What's the conflict I face? Is to fight back or to talk about them. What's the conflict of the one that I blame? Is to stop bullying me versus continue. And it allows them to put themselves in their shoes and actually find practical ways of resolving these conflicts that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. So that's just a quick overview. So when those that do download the app, you know what you're getting into. So 3 very simple library views that you can go into that will show you the decisions you're working on, ones that have been shared with you that you can comment on, and the ones that are in the community library. So even if you don't use the app for yourself, it's fascinating to just find out what problems people are working on and how they're resolving them. So I'll stop sharing and hand it back and see if we have some time to answer more questions.
Alan, thank you. That's it's a really, really clever piece of software and so interesting to see you demonstrate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Alan. I have tons of notes and I need to watch back over this so that I can go through that the 5 steps perfectly. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been so nice having you this evening.
It's been a wonderful opportunity, and that's exactly the reason why we created this app, is that you actually don't have to remember these 5 steps, right? That it's always with you 24/7, completely anonymous, right? As you don't feel that you're going to be judged, etc. And that's why, especially the younger generation, we're finding out that they really love the app, because that gives them that ability to do these things by themselves first, but then also to share it. And as soon as you share it, you realize, we're all special, but we're not unique. We all face bloody similar dark clouds, And the fact that the dark clouds are there is almost like being in London, right? You have these dark clouds that can make you miserable if you don't see the sun, but you know that the sun is there. You just have to find a way of evaporating those dark clouds. And that's basically the idea of the app, is providing us with a simple step-by-step process to evaporate those dark clouds that we face in our personal life and at work, and in the process come up with some really breakthrough solutions, because it helped us to challenge and overcome some limiting assumptions or beliefs.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Your wisdom is inspiring as always. That's fantastic. So we'll see you all next week. Thanks again, Alan.
Thank you.